Uh, this is day 10 almost. Uh, 10 days ago almost this tragedy took place. And seemed like every day we have had more evidences coming to the surface from the different sources. And naturally, the more evidences is coming to the surface, the more theories are coming out, both from actually engineers and non-engineers. As I have said before, I think we need to be patient. We need to give times to the investigators who are investigating this issue because they have the access to all the evidences and they're going to be able to tell us. But as I have said before, at the end of the day, I don't believe we are going to be able to say that only one factor caused. Maybe one factor break the camel's back, but I think many factors interplayed and created the so-called perfect storm. The other thing that's, I think, very important in investigating this issue is that I think we are going to be able to get maybe 95% close to the finding out, exactly replicating the scenario, but I don't believe we are going to be able to completely, because this is such a complex problem. You are dealing with the foundation. You are dealing with, we are not going to be able to find out exactly the soil condition under the piles, in the vicinity of the piles. So because of that, it's going to be we are going to get very close to telling the story, the complete story, but it's not going to be 100% because of the level of the complexity that's involved with this issue. And that is why actually at the FIU right now we are doing some very detailed analysis, and we are actually planning to conduct analysis, very sophisticated analysis, that we can simulate different scenarios, like one column is collapsed, or two columns collapse, or three columns collapse, and then see if that is causing the complete building collapses. Our objective is not to duplicate the work that is going on, but our objective is more trying to see what we can learn from this tragic accident and how we should be changing our building codes and the way we do the business in the future. I think this building is going to be a milestone for changes that's going to be coming, and the changes that we are going to incorporate into our building code, the way we inspect the buildings, the way we construct, the whole process. I think this building is going to be a milestone in that sense. One of the changes I think that we are going to see, or I hope to see, is that we're going to have to revisit our very fundamental design philosophies that we have when we design a mid-rise building, high-rise buildings. Now, this is not an exact similar condition, but or example is the best example to use. But for design and construction of the buildings that are in the areas where it is prone to seismic event, earthquakes, we in 1950s actually, Park and Pauley in New Zealand came up with this concept that really we should be designing our buildings and our infrastructure so that in seismic events, when an earthquakes of magnitude 8 even, or even 9 even comes, the building can sustain damage even beyond the repair. So another way, you have to demolish the buildings right after the earthquakes, but the building should not collapse, okay? The reason for that philosophy is to save life. Another way, we design a building, we know that it's going to get damaged. And the reason we do that is because we don't know the magnitude of the earthquakes. Now we are going to the performance design now, that's different. But the basic concept is that we should do whatever that's needed in earthquakes so that the building does not collapse. Now, we don't have to go to that extent in the non-seismic areas. but we can incorporate some details in the buildings so that for whatever reason the building sustained a damage, the building should not collapse, should deform. We have to demolish it. But it gives a chance for people to live there. Maybe collapse after a couple hours, 3 hours. But it gives ample warnings and allows the people to leave the buildings. Right now, our buildings in non-seismic area is not designed like that. At least for certain buildings located in certain locations, I think we need to do that. So in that sense, I think there is a fundamental and philosophical changes that we need to incorporate into our buildings. Now, I'm sure that some of you, my own colleagues, are going to say, oh, that's going to cost lots of money. Well, do we want to see another scenario like this? Another 150 people die in a building? Does that worth to be more conservative and pay a little more and make sure that the buildings that we design doesn't collapse on top of people? Of course, my answer is yes. And I think we have a tendency of maybe when we move away from these kind of tragic events, we kind of lose the side of the fact that what kind of similar tragedy can cause. So from that perspective, I think we need to revisit some of the philosophies that we have and incorporate some changes into our building codes. I can tell you that there is, when it comes to like bridge, let's say for example, we have a national system where like we have a US DOT, the US Department of Transportation. We have Federal Highway Administration underneath of the US DOT. We have the AASHTO that represents all the states. And all these entities are responsible to make sure that the safety of our bridges are preserved, they are maintained, and they are fixed on a timely manner. We don't have that kind of system for buildings. You cannot pinpoint this one organization saying at the national level, that organization represents the buildings. We don't have that kind of system. So it depends on the state. So especially in the South Florida, I think we're gonna have to sit down. We've done a wonderful job. I mean, we designed our buildings for the hurricane forces. And after the Andrews, the hurricane, I mean, we made lots of changes. But I think there's a room to make some additional changes, and maybe the Florida will be the forefront of that. I think there's also a need to develop an inspection system. When I say system, means that inspection procedure, I think we need to provide the inspectors with a better guidelines, what needs to be inspected, what needs to be reported. That system should include the follow-up and so on. And I think the people at the city, the government authorities, they are more experienced, they are more qualified to talk about that issue. But certainly it will be good to take a fresh look at our inspection system, the maintenance, the follow-up, and everything else that surrounds that. And I think when it comes to inspection also, we need to make sure that, first of all, it's more frequent. Right now, the requirement is that in 40 years you have to get the recertifications. Now, if you think about the inspection, I think actually it will be more economical, more effective if we inspect at least not everything. The recertification involves the structural and the electrical component. Not everything, but maybe at least maybe every 5 years, I don't know, maybe 10 years, to inspect the major component of the buildings that holds up the building. If there are areas that are prone to the corrosion, maybe we inspect those portions more carefully in 5 years or 10 years. And that is going to result into a timely action. It's going to be cheaper, and once you solve it, then you may not have to revisit it. Along that line, also, it will be good to not just say there is a cracking. I don't believe it's enough to say, I saw the cracking in this column. Okay? It's like going in, let's say you have some health issue and you have some temperature, and the doctor says just take a Tylenol. Now, why do you have a temperature? If you don't fix the cause, your temperature, you may still have that off and on. So it's the same thing. You have to, I think, it's not enough just to say there's a cracking over here. Let's say, for example, let's say I use a wrong foundation system, a foundation system that's not suitable for a certain area. And that foundation system causes a non-uniform settlement. Now, anytime the building deforms non-uniformly, it may cause, let's say, doors may not be shut completely. Sliding doors may not be functioning right. So if you just keep changing the doors and you don't fix the foundation, you're still going to have that problem. And if you just patch the cracking in the concrete column, but if you don't fix the foundation, you're still going to have that problem. So what you should treat is the foundation, not the cracking in the column. So that's what I mean by inspection system, where things are laid out, people know exactly what it is. You have to not to treat the symptoms, but treat the cause of the problem. I think, but you can't expect that to be trivial. It's not trivial. Sometimes you have to follow up the visual inspection by a more non-destructive testing, so that we don't treat the symptoms, but we treat the cause. I think another item is to, even though, as I said, it's going to take some time for us to find out what the cause or causes of this collapse was. But at the same time, I think from what we have seen, we can develop a temporary or template and make some conclusions, and so that we can have a better guidelines on how to inspect similar buildings sitting in similar locations if needed. So I think one of the immediate action could be that, to develop some suggestions, and I think the best people to do that are going to be the people who are gathering the evidence, facts, and so on. So the sooner they can do that for us, they can tell us that, okay, we saw this in this building, and as a result, if you see a, let's say, certain similar cracking, inspect this part of the building. I think those are an interim recommendation. It will be great if it comes from the people that are inspecting, to provide a little more guidelines, because lots of people are very concerned that are living in the high-rise buildings, and I think that will help them to stay calm. So that's one area that we don't have to wait a long time. Many people ask me, what do you think about what caused the collapse? And like I said, it's going to take time. But I think certainly, I have had a chance to look at the design plans for this building. It will be good. It will be good, and I'm pretty sure that the people who are investigating this collapse, they are doing that. I think it will be good to look at to pay close attention to the foundations, system that was used for this building. Take a look at maybe the piles. Take a look at the floor system that was used. Anything that they can collect the information on the floor system, how it performed, some of the details around the columns and so on, and also take a closer maybe look at the system that was used in this building to resist the lateral loads. The shear walls, for example, there's a shear wall which is a solid concrete wall by the elevator shaft. That's I think on the west side. That's a side that actually stood up, didn't collapse. And so there was a much larger shear wall in that region, and then there was a smaller shear wall on the around the staircase. Basically, I think going in the north south direction, I believe, a small shear wall, and that's a area where failed actually about 10 seconds with about few second delay. And so taking a closer look at the performance or the influences those shear wall had in both regions, and the floor system and the foundation, I think that will be that should help us in the future. Again, I think people who are close to the action, I think they're going to be able to collect some information and then later tell us exactly, for example, what were the role of those elements in the performance of the buildings. One thing would be, I have seen in many collapses, is that we have a tendency to rush to conclusion and implement certain policies, certain rules that stay with us for a long, long time and is not needed. Just to say that we did something. I think it will be good if we don't rush into the conclusion and don't implement policies or rules or whatever that governs the, I don't know, design, construction, inspection, or whatever of the building is, that will stay with us for a long, long time and is not necessary, and all it's going to do is just waste resources. So I think it will be wise not to do that. There are so many elements. In what we say in the academia, it's a multidisciplinary problem. And if you have a multidisciplinary problem, you need a different expertise to solve the problem. In that sense, and also remembering the fact that almost everything we have in our building codes or the bridge codes, every single one of those design provisions have come from the academia as a result of the research the faculty do and so on. So hopefully among the stakeholders that the city officials or other entities that will be discussing with in order to see what changes we need to incorporate, academia will play a good role in that. Because I think some of these issues that we need to revisit and change demands taking a very deep look at some of these issues. And that's where I think there's a value to be added by working closely with the academia. On the question of the retrofit, I think we need to take advantage of some of the new technologies that have become available and to develop some new ways of retrofitting or upgrading these where it's needed. Okay, as an example, let's say we see, for example, a cracking in the columns. Let's say it's just a corrosion. Let's say corrosion problem, and we know that the salt water is going to be there for a long time, no matter what we do. There are lessons to be learned from other infrastructure, such as bridge, for example. In the last few years, we have used material that is called ultra high performance concrete, or UHPC for abbreviation. This concrete is so dense that nothing penetrates. Another way, if I cover the floor system of the garage with this, with a thin layer of this material, and certain portion of the column, just be proactive. You can make a pool out of your garage, and you can be assured that's going to be safe. So strategically, in certain areas where we need to retrofit, I think we can use some of these new materials. It's a bit more expensive, but you don't have to worry about the maintenance anymore. And so looking at some of the advanced methods of retrofitting, I think that's another way, not just using the same old methods of using a regular concrete. I think that will also go a long way in order to make sure that we address these retrofit issues more effectively. For example, if you use a UHPC in certain areas, actually it's possible to bring the structure to the condition that's even better than the original conditions. So nowadays we know much more than the 70s. And that actually brings another issue too that I think it's important, and that is the way the engineering and the science is advancing. Unfortunately, we learn from our bad experiences. We learn from our failures, not from our successes. That's been the history of the infrastructure. And this case is not exceptional. So I think rather than a finger pointing, really I think what we should do is learn from here and keep in mind that that's how the engineering, that's how the science have advanced. We always learn from our failures. Unfortunately, in this case, many lives was lost, which is very tragic. But I'm certain that some really good things are going to come out of this. I think this building is going to be a milestone for many changes that's going to be incorporated into our building code, the way we design them, the way we construct them, the way we inspect them. I think there's going to be lots of good changes are going to be coming out of this this tragic event, and we need to make sure that we study this very carefully in a detailed manner so we can extract every lesson that could be learned from this experience, so such event do not take place again.